Service above self. This is a guiding principle of Rotary International. It emphasizes the importance of putting needs of others before your own interests. It reflects our personal commitment to the community service, ethical leadership, and contributing to the greater good. You don't necessarily have to be a Rotarian to live a life of service. Doesn't hurt, as we'll hear today. San Miguel is a very special town in Mexico. It's home to over 120 nonprofit organizations, many of which apply this principle to fostering a spirit of generosity, kindness, and selfishness. Today, we've invited Gigi Alexander to share her story of service above self. Gigi is a celebrated travel writer. Her works have been published in such publications as the BBC, Lonely Planet, Travel and Leisure, Condé Nast, National Geographic. She is a former editor and the editor-in-chief of the British literary journal Panorama. Gigi has lived a life of service well before moving to San Miguel. She lived with Mother Teresa's orphanage in India, rehabilitating wild animals like leopards. She's planted orchids in remote regions, aided impoverished women. She spent her entire adult life making life better wherever and whenever she could. She came to San Miguel to finish a novel, but then the pandemic hit and her life changed. Five years ago, she established a sanctuary here, and now she's helped over 4,000 animals here in San Miguel. You might be wondering, how in the heck did that happen? Well, you want to find out? Gigi, come and tell us.
Anyway, I have actually given a talk to Rotary before. In New York, I gave a talk on women in expedition because I was an adventure writer and adventurer. And my primary experience was doing long distance walks across countries by myself. And then I fell into travel writing. And somehow I ended up in San Miguel. But let's start at the beginning. So when I was a kid, and they asked us what we wanted to be when we grew up, I said I wanted to be a philanthropist. Then I found out to be a philanthropist, you have to have money. I didn't know that. And being an altruist wasn't something that was like achievable. Like nobody was really an altruist for a living. That was something you did on your day off, or something you did on your vacation, or something you did for a summer during high school, but nobody lived as an altruist. And I remember reading about Alexander Comte. Alexander Comte was a mathematician and a thinker, a philosopher during the Victorian era. And in about 1850, he coined the word altruism. Altruism was an important component of a system of belief that he created called positivism. And altruism comes from the word somebody else. Comes from the word somebody else. I remember reading about him, and what he was basically talking about was that we have to leave self-interest behind in order to improve the world. It just seemed like such a drastic way to approach life, and I didn't know anybody like that. I knew that maybe nuns were like that, or maybe a missionary, but like regular people had to go to work and buy a house and have children and have a job and get married and retire and then go on vacation. And that's what your life was going to be. And so I began that life, as a young adult. But I was always that kid that, remember when they used to send people door to door to collect food in the 70s? I would always give all the good food away. And my mother would come home and say, "Where's all of our food?" And I said, "Well, they came to the door and they asked for the food." Or when they would send the people door to door to ask for clothes or toys, I would give all my stuff away. And when my parents would give me a gift, they would say, "Now don't give it away." And when I was about 20, I was living in my tiny town. And there was a soup kitchen run by the Catholic Church, and nobody went there. like nobody went. And each church actually had its own soup kitchen, each one of them taken advantage of by the wrong people and not used by the right people. And at 20 years old, I made a coalition of all the churches. So when I went to the Mormon church, I wore the dress because they asked me to wear a dress. And when I went to the Muslim mosque, I stayed in the area they told me to. And when I went to the Baptist church, I went the route they told me to. And I managed to bring all of those different churches together, and we made this huge soup kitchen. And I ran that for about 7 years. And that was just on Saturday. And this weird thing happened during that time. This Saturday became like, I'm almost going to cry thinking about it, but it was the best day of the week. You know, it was. And I didn't like the rest of the week. I didn't like having to go to work, and I didn't like having to slave away to pay my rent. What I loved was those people that would show up at that soup kitchen on Saturday. And it didn't matter who they were. It didn't matter whether they really needed it or not. It didn't matter. The service mattered, and I just loved it. And I loved bringing people of different points of view together. It didn't matter whether they were Republican or Democrat. It didn't matter whether they were white or Indian. It didn't matter whether they were Muslim or Mormon. Everybody was in the same room doing something good, and that's what I wanted. And then I realized the world wasn't really like that, and the world is very striated, where this group of people that believe this stay over here, and this group stays over here. And I began this long journey of about 25 years traveling the world. I left my small town, and my parents asked me, why do you want to go? And I said, I want to see how real people live. And I went to the poorest places on the planet. I went to leper colonies. I went to orphanages. I went to places that were just so isolated and poor, indigenous communities all over the world. I would have these incredible adventures that I would get paid to write about. And then I would take 3 months and I would go do something really hard, like digging pit latrines in the jungle, or helping women give birth, or collecting orchids for samples for naturalists, or tracking whales, or just doing something grueling and hard. Or I spent 7 years living in a Mother Teresa orphanage, for example. 7 years with 77 disabled children in India. I taught mathematics although I'm no mathematician, to girls in Bihar, one of the most dangerous places in India. I lived there for 2 years. I did a lot of hard things, and every time I would come back to America, I would see that same striation. I see it today. Everybody divided, everybody complaining about how the other person is wrong, and nobody really gathering together for a cause, which is why I really appreciate the Rotary, because the Rotary doesn't pay attention to those differences. The Rotary comes together to aid. And that's why we're on the planet, is to lift humanity by lifting each other. At any rate, I had all these different adventures around the world, and I kept thinking about Alexander Comte and how he said, when we place our own self-interest above others, we lower the state of everyone. But it still seemed unachievable. It seemed like something I could only do like for 3 months at a time. Even my volunteer work, where I was able to work, say, with Mother Teresa's missionaries, the longest I lasted was 2 years, and then I had to take a break. At a certain point, I decided to become a nun because that seemed like the only option to be able to be of service all the time. But I wasn't able to find a group of nuns that got along. In other words, the convents were kind of a microcosm of the world itself. They have all the same problems that we have in the world. And I think with the advent of social media, began seeing so many people talking about differences and how they hated each other on social media all the time. And I didn't want to be one of those people. I always have told everybody that it doesn't matter who somebody is. I want everybody to sit at my table. I don't care how you vote, and I don't care what you believe. I care that you're there to do good. I'm not common in that way. I'm not a common person in that way, because I think human beings are naturally directed to look for difference and to kind of create cliques of belonging rather than allowing everybody in, rather than finding something in common. So it's a long journey for me. And When I finally got to San Miguel, which was actually about 6 years ago, I just realized talking to this gentleman here over breakfast, 6 years, I decided I wasn't going to be altruistic anymore. That's painful for me to say because I feel like that was like a selfish thing, but I felt like the world is always telling you to self-care and to take care of yourself. And so I was like, this is going to be the me time. I had read about San Miguel and its beauty. I had been here like years before. Frankly, before I came here, I was volunteering in Navajo Nation, which was incredibly poor. And before that, I was living on a tiny island off of New Zealand, tracking the last living dinosaur, also very grueling. And I just wanted a latte. I wanted good, I wanted good Wi-Fi. I wanted a flushing toilet. I wanted fresh produce. I wanted to speak English if I wanted, but I wanted to be somewhere else. I wanted art and culture. I wanted it to be pretty. San Miguel fit the bill. So I came here. And I was here for about 3 weeks. I did all the things. I rented the beautiful apartment that I shared with all my friends on social media. I had a beautiful view of the parochia from the rooftop. I would sit up there and drink wine. I had wine parties at my house. Everybody came over. Everybody was my friend. It was all beautiful. Everything was beautiful. The jacarandas are beautiful. The bougainvillea over the doors. Oh my gosh, what an inspiring, beautiful place. And then I was walking by the parochia one night, and there was a little tiny puppy there. And I took him home. His name's Osito. He still lives with me now. And he changed the direction of my life. I wasn't going to keep him. I was going to give him to somebody else. I wasn't at that time in my life. I was going to think about me. And then I convinced myself that I could still travel the world with this little tiny dog. There was just one problem. Osito didn't want to be the only dog. Every dog that dog saw on the street, he wanted to bring home with us. And that's actually how the sanctuary started. So I was friends with a vet at the time, and this was about 5 years ago. And so I rescued Osito, and I took him to my vet, Dr. Angel, who's also a co-founder of my current sanctuary. And he said, hey, why don't we start a rescue from your apartment? And I was like, well, it's really small. And he was like, I think we can rescue like 4 puppies at a time. So we decided, okay, only 4 puppies at a time. Well, 2 months later, we had 16 puppies, 25 puppies. Puppies were left out on the road. But, hi, Susan. But more than that, there was this strange thing that happened to me in that every time I looked out the window at my beautiful view, every time I was on my rooftop, I didn't see the parochia anymore. I saw the dog 2 roofs over that was starving to death that the person wasn't feeding. I saw the 2 dogs with mange on the balcony that the person wasn't taking care of. I saw the pregnant dog on the ancha. Everywhere I looked, I could not see the suffering of animals. It completely changed my lens on the place. And I struggled so hard to go back to that beautiful lens of the beautiful cobblestone roads and the beautiful painted buildings and the jacarandas and the wonderful culture and the people. And I couldn't go back. And it was one of the most painful experiences I've ever had because I really wanted that so badly, but it wasn't my destiny. About 2,000 dogs later, out of that apartment, I ended up renting Arno's place. Arno was the one who started Migo de Animales. He had passed away and his property was open. So Dr. Angel and I rented it, and I took my little single rescue of just myself, found a board, and turned it into a real NGO, which was terrifying, because that's a total loss of control. And I've been the executive director of it ever since. And in that period of time, I have seen so much suffering, more than I ever saw anywhere that I was ever in the world. Any country that I ever went to, I never saw anything like what I've seen here. Never. And I'm not going to tell you what I've seen because it's not for everybody, it's not. But I'm going to get to how to handle that in a couple minutes because I think one of the problems we have as far as expat culture here is, well, what do we do? Expats don't move here to start a rescue. They don't move here to take a pregnant dog and have it live in their shower. So what do you do? How do you handle all of these animal problems that you see everywhere? It's not just with donations, it's actually a shift in your attitude, I think, that's important. But anyway, we were at the Arno's place, and it wasn't working. He had a big, beautiful home, but almost no space for animals. And they sold it, and we had nowhere to go. We had all of these animals and nowhere to go. And at that point, I began looking for a piece of land. And since I didn't have a lot of financial support and I raised most of the money myself through my friends and family, I decided to buy a piece of land that was the cheapest I could find in the mountains. I can't tell you where it is. It's about 40 minutes from San Miguel. We keep the location private to prevent animal dumping, of course. And we moved there in December. I lived in a tent with 100 dogs, and we had no bathrooms. We still don't. We're building them now. No kitchen, no running water, no nothing. And we began fundraising every week to build the next part. We're now almost done with the service building, and we've raised $110,000. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Many people in this room actually have donated, and you might think that the donors are like donating $1,000, but actually it's the $25 donations built up, and we have a lot of repeat donors as well. And it's those people that make the huge difference, the consistent donors that are donating small amounts. And I think a lot of those donors come out of watching my entire life, because a lot of the people that donate were following me when I did volunteer with Mother Teresa and things like that, and they see my integrity. I haven't been paid in 5 years. I'm wearing my work clothes right now. I got up at 4 in the morning to take care of 77 puppies before I could come here to talk to you. My commitment is total. And I think that's a rare thing, and that's why people donate, is they're happy that someone's willing to take that much of themselves and give it to a project that a lot of people couldn't do. So anyway, we've been building out there for since December, and it's been the hardest thing I have ever done. It's so hard. It's very remote. It's cold. We're at 6,500 altitude. We get torrential rain, keeping the animals dry, building a hospital. I'm in vet tech school. There's so many problems we have to solve every single day. We don't come in back and forth to town. We're just completely our own unit out there doing this amazing thing. Right now, the sanctuary is 3 acres. It's paid for, that 3 acres. And of course, we have to buy another acre on 3 sides. So one side faces a road, and then we have to buy an acre on each side. Why? Because in Mexico, people poison dogs. So you can't have a fence where you would have access to animals. You have to have a border. But also, we don't just rescue dogs, we rescue donkeys. Donkeys are the most abused animal in Mexico. They are going extinct here because of the abuse. And unfortunately, the sanctuary gets a lot of donkeys. But Mexico doesn't sell hay year-round, so there's no food. So you have to have enough pasture for them to be able to eat. So they have to have 3 more acres, assuming you're going to have up to 20 donkeys at any time. Now, the donkeys we adopt out in pairs. The dogs, honestly, I'm not a proponent of adopting out every adult dog. I don't think it's possible. I think some can get adopted and some can't. So the sanctuary exists as a holding place for some animals to live forever. And that's why it's a sanctuary. And then we have an enormous puppy program going to 3 different charities in the United States. And we have 77 puppies now, and out of that, 70 of those will go to the U.S. It's an enormous project. So we take 70 at a time, and we adopt them all out. We get 70 more, we adopt them all out, and they all go to the U.S. It's a massive project, and it's never going to stop. It's never going to stop. But I think I just keep going back to Alexander Comte all the time. And when I read him, and I remember I would go to my teachers and I would say, how can I be like that person? And they would say, well, you can't. That's not realistic. Well, I've found a way to be that way. I've found a way to live that way. And when they told me they wanted me to give a PowerPoint presentation and, show pictures of donkeys and the sanctuary being built, I thought, that's not actually the best thing I could walk out of here having done. If you want to donate to my sanctuary, great. What would make more difference to me is if you walked out changing your limitations about what you think you can do. That would help the community more than helping me. I would just be like one person you could help. But let's talk a little bit about altruism and how you're using it in your life. So most people, when they think of, a social problem, like I want everybody to think of a social problem that you've seen in San Miguel right now. Think about it. Think of something, put it in your mind. What is a social problem you have seen here that you feel like you can do nothing about? Probably poverty, domestic violence, a lack of food, animals. There's so many problems. Put that problem in your mind and now immediately notice that you've drawn a circle around it. And you're staying in that circle. I'm doing what I can. Everybody's doing the best they can. I know my limitations. These are the things we tell ourselves. But I would invite you to consider that you don't have to either be like that or be like me in order to help with the problem. There's actually other routes, there's other ways you can go. And that's what I want everybody to think about when they leave here today, is what is your other route? Like, for example, if you saw a pregnant dog, why is your only solution to call a rescue or take the dog in yourself? Why are those your only two solutions so you do nothing? Right? There are other solutions. What are they? How could you help that animal in another way? Everybody has to be thinking like that, particularly in such an impoverished place. Because in Mexico, we are in the top 10 in the world for the worst animal stewardship in the world. Mexico. We're in the top 10 of the world for the worst animal stewardship. And that's not just dogs. The reason that we're in the top 10 is for a myriad of reasons. One, we have one of the highest domestic violence rates in the world. Domestic violence is directly correlated to animal abuse and child abuse. So when you empower women, you will have less domestic violence. One. Two, when the United States decided that it would abandon horse slaughter in Canada and make it illegal, people that want to kill their horses for money, for horse meat, or for other materials now send their horses here. And guess which state kills the most? We do. In fact, some of the biggest horse slaughter factories are right in Querétaro. So that lowers our number a lot as far as animal stewardship. Animal farming and the way farm animals are treated is some of the worst in the world, particularly for commercial animals. When you walk down the street in San Miguel and you see a shop that has lots of chickens stacked, where do you think they came from? Humane conditions? Where do you think all those eggs came from? Humane? No, none. There's no. And it's a meat-eating culture, but it's not really a conscious culture about where that comes from. Then we have the dog abuse. While in the United States, 3 million dogs are in shelters at any time. In Mexico, only 90,000 are in shelters at any time. That 90,000 includes places like Canino Controlar, rescues. I see Doug here from Lucky Dog, so they would be at his place, they would be at my place, they would be at individual rescuers. Only 90,000, and half of those are going to be killed every single week. And while the numbers in the United States look better than ours in terms of like how many animals are actually abused, they guess 3 million dogs with owners who are keeping them in neglectful conditions exist alongside the 3 million that are in the street. So we're in a crisis. And it reminds me of something in elementary school that I learned. So when I was about 12, we learned about the Holocaust. And I was very upset by it, and we didn't get to see any photos of it or anything like that. And I begged my parents, could I please see photos? And on my 12th birthday, they let me see photos. And one of the things that struck me more, that was worse than the Holocaust, was that I learned that people knew about it and they didn't do anything. As a child, I could not really understand that. And that's kind of how I look at the animal problem here. How can we all know about it and do nothing? You know, how can we all know about that? How can we see that every day? How can we know that that's right by us and do nothing? And I decided, rather than telling other people that they were wrong for doing nothing, that I needed to do something first. You have to be the thing that you want in the world before you can ask other people to join you in that. And that's my life. So the sanctuary is a permanent sanctuary. It belongs to the foundation. I simply run it. When I die, someone else will come and run it. It exists for 100 years on that property. That's an incredible thing in Mexico. There's only one other place like that here in Mexico, and it's outside of Mexico City. So it has an American board. It has Guide Star designation for silver for transparency. I am not on the board. That's very important if you're looking for donations and transparency. It gets grants. It gets money from big donors around the world, and it gets some donors from here in San Miguel. In order to sustain something like that, I think I have to keep in mind Comte's idea that self-interest is secondary to the greater good, one. And two, to never treat the animal problem like the way people treated the Holocaust. Because that's what we're doing here. We're just ignoring it and we're acting like it's not important because we don't feel powerful about it and we don't know what to do. So now I want to talk about, well, what in the world could you do? Because one thing I hear a lot is, well, I see a mother dog, but I can't have her. Or I'm older, I can't adopt this big dog that I see. Or I don't have the money to take care of that. Or what happens to the puppies if I can't adopt them? Or I just didn't come here for that, man. You know, I hear that all the time. I have a couple suggestions. One is, please get involved with the sanctuary. The sanctuary has really interesting programs coming up. Next year, we launch our donor volunteer program. So we don't allow volunteers all the time. We're not a day volunteer program. We want committed people that choose our sanctuary as their charity of choice. And what we're doing is we're building an entire live area for those volunteers, and they come in a group. And for San Miguel, you'll come for a weekend. You work together. And the way I'm sculpting it is that you don't actually see tragedy. That's very important, that when you go and do something like that, you're not dealing with really sick animals, you're not dealing with dying animals. You're socializing puppies and playing ball with donkeys, and that it should be pleasurable. You should get something from it so you want to keep doing it and you see something positive. So you could participate in that. Come for the weekend with a couple other expats, you know, go play with puppies all day, play with donkeys all day. What a pleasure. Clean a lot, but you know, it's beautiful, and you just be there for the weekend. Another project I'm going to launch next year is I've written a book. It's called Osito, and it's about the first dog that I found. And believe it or not, it is not a depressing book. It is a beautiful, happy book, a book that tourists would buy, with all the landmarks in San Miguel, and Osito who leaves the campo to the big city because he wants to see the city, and him looking at San Miguel and traveling around, and then him getting adopted, and him slowly bringing in hundreds of animals into the apartment, and then eventually moving to the sanctuary. This book and others, I want to make a library program for impoverished schools like the kinders and the prime areas. And I want people to bring books to those schools and also read those books to them, because I think the place of change in Mexico is going to be through children. Children is really where it's going to change. We can see that even in rescue now. When we see a child really abusing a dog, they've always been abused by the parent. Always. Okay. As I said, domestic violence is very high here. Child abuse is very high. Those things are connected directly to animal abuse. So by improving the self-esteem of children and also doing a lot of storytelling around animals and humanizing those animals and giving them personalities, that's really going to change the way people treat their animals. I also think sterilization programs and things like that are important, but someone has to deal with the living dogs, okay, because people are going to keep not sterilizing their animals. So educating children is going to be really important. So those are two ways you could take part without actually taking in a dog. You know, it's very important to think about what can I actually do? What am I capable of doing? But also think outside of that line. Like, well, maybe I don't want to go to the sanctuary for a weekend, but you could do that. You're capable of doing that. You could leave your life for a weekend and you could go do that and you could have that experience. And then you'd have talking points when you talk to other people. Anyway, how much more time do I have? 10. I think my whole journey to come to this point was a battle. And for people that followed me on social media and watched me lose my life, because I was a famous writer, I was a famous explorer, I was in the Explorers Club, I could go anywhere in the world and get a press trip, I was very accomplished. Honestly, all that began to not have any meaning the more I helped the animals here. The more I helped them, the less I cared about any of that. The less I cared that Condé Nast published me. So what? You know, what did that really matter? What really mattered was saving that life in my arms right then. And I knew that at the end of my life, what would have more value to me? In my obituary, she wrote for Condé Nast, or she saved 10,000 dogs. Which thing did I want? I wanted 10,000 dogs. I do think that there's this idea that rescue is only for some people. And I just would like to invite everybody to consider that rescue can look like a lot of different things. I have Trish in my audience here, and she just adopted a dog from me, a little dog. That little dog was thrown in the canal in Celaya to drown while it was pregnant. These are common solutions by ignorant people here. Because we're coming from places of non-ignorance, whether we're Mexican or American, because we're gathered together in service, whether it's Rotary or something else, we have an advantage that we can educate other people, but we have to learn how. Simply telling someone you have to sterilize your dog is not enough. It's not enough. Giving them slow invitations, slow building a relationship with people that you know that maybe do not have the means to take care of their animal properly or don't have the knowledge. Building relationships with your neighbors so you can suggest something over time is going to make way more headway than simply telling them what to do, because we're guests, you know, and we have to move in this culture as guests. So what I want to leave you with is an invitation that circle that you have around what you think you can do around animal welfare is not the real circle. It's actually way outside of that, way outside of that. And the problem is we have really black and white thinking about how we can help animals. You don't have to become me. I'm rare. I'm aware not a lot of people are going to do what I'm doing, but you can do something. There's something you can do. And it's very important, I think, too, to feel comfortable reaching out to people like me on Messenger or in my Facebook group and ask for help and ask for advice when you see a situation, because the more you know, the more you do. Anyway, I will answer questions now, and I hope that was a good talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think we have a few questions for you, and I know Gary tapped me on the shoulder here.
There is something you can do here. It's called Control Canino. If you don't know what it is, it's the city kill shelter. So when you work there, you have to have a hard heart. Because what you're doing, you're an adoption person and you're a hospice person. The dogs that are not adoptable because they're vicious or whatever, they're going to get put down. But that doesn't mean they can't have a week of quality life. So if you have a heart that can stand not having them there the next week when you go back, but the joy of sending these dogs all around the world. Control Canino.
That's a really good, just to give some background of that, Canino Controlar, in Mexico, there are only kill shelters. The public shelters are all kill shelters. And people, Mexican people, sometimes have the misbelief, and expats too, that if they give a dog there, it's going to live, it's going to get adopted, it's going to be fostered, but most of them are going to be killed because they can't save them all. And so if you go there, they have a dog walking program several days a week, and you can go and play with puppies or play with a dog and give that dog love. That's a great program to volunteer for, and that's a great suggestion. They also will pick you up, so you don't have to drive there. They'll take you there.
Other questions? No? To the boss.
Thank you so much. That was a great
Hope it was a good
non-PowerPoint presentation.
non-PowerPoint. Oh, thank you so much.